Greetings! Anton here with a very special H3VR devlog. Special because something magical happened to me this past week, which is that I was going through an old box of documents, reorganizing my life like post wildfire madness, and I found a stack of bare drives from like 15 years ago that I had marked dead back when they had failed in my computer. And just on a lark, I decided to plug one of them into a external enclosure, and it spun up somehow. And so I got literally like 15 years of my creative life and history back this week. I found a whole bunch of wild stuff, including my first 3D animations. Ooh, rough. Those were from when I was 10. My first 3D fan art. Duh. And the big find, the part that's had me over the moon excited, because it's been something I've been able to tell people about over the years, but never really show them, which is that I found the documentation and a bunch of the source files to my first VR game, my first VR work back from like 2006. Yep, you heard right. 19 years ago. So here is some footage to start off with my undergrad senior thesis project, The Escape, which looking back is like the forgotten predecessor to H3VR. What you're seeing here isn't HMD VR, obviously. It is a low-cost cave VR setup. There's a magnetic antenna above my head, a couple feet wide, 6 DOF sensors in my head and in my hands, and a dedicated computer running all of it. Basically like a Razer Hydra, if you remember one of those, but huge. It feeds that data into a second computer running the game itself, drawing 2 views, one for each eye, out of projectors that are far behind the screen I'm standing in front of, and I'm wearing a pair of polarized glasses that is letting the left and right eye see only one of those 2 projectors, similar to like 3D movies. So for the game itself, as you can see, what I was interested in was trying to make interactive guns that worked like guns did. You reach down to your belt for ammo with one of your hands, you reload magazines, you put individual shotgun shells into the shotgun, there's a minigun that you insert a box into and flip up the belt. So for some background, because I'm sure some of you have some questions here, what, where, why, etc. This all took place at the University of Buffalo Digital Media Studies Department. I was a student and later an instructor there. And I was actually about to drop out in my sophomore year of undergrad because I was super interested in 3D animation, but the type of 3D work you could do at that department wasn't what I wanted to do. I saw like Blizzard game cinematics, and I was like, I want to do that, but the sort of stuff you could do in those classes was like, you're gonna make, 3D stuff for like advertisements. It was just, I wasn't into it. I was about to leave, and then a comp sci professor thankfully pulled me aside, because I was in his class out of boredom, and he was like, what's the weird art kid with the long black trench coat and the chainmail armor doing in my class? And he turned me on to this interesting stuff that was going on in the digital media studies department. And I went over there, and it was this VR system, and it was completely life-changing. Changed the entire course of my life. That professor, who sadly I don't even remember his name, but I remember the moment. And it was just the coolest thing I'd ever encountered. The setup that you see in that in the video here was put together by 2 professors at the Media Studies Department, Josephine Anstey and Dave Pape. And for some context, back in 2004, 2005, virtual reality was very expensive. Like a full cave VR system, which had like multiple walls, like on the sides and on the top, was like a 6-figure setup to put together. And so the only universities that had these systems were doing like military grants or like big data visualization. It was all science and engineering. So if you're like an artist or someone into like games in that era, you didn't have access to those sorts of things. And so the two professors I mentioned had put together this setup that was like the lowest cost way you could have a barely cave. It was just a single screen, two short throw projectors, the sort of like janked together magnetic tracking system. But that was cheap enough for an art department to be able to put together one of those systems. I think the whole thing, all said and told, was like about 10 grand at that time to put together. And what was super cool is that, like, to go with that system, Dave Pape had written this scripting language that was geared towards artists, towards people who didn't have deep programming experience, and it was networked out of the gate, meaning anything that you made, every entity that was spawned into the world, the player characters, other setups could sort of like could join like a multiplayer server, and your head and your hands were there. It was absolutely magical. I, as you might imagine, became completely obsessed with it. I spent all of my spare time working on it, which was mostly in the middle of the night because I was an undergrad. So it was just like the professors had access to it, then all the grad students doing work, then people in classes for it, and then me. But I made a whole bunch of different prototype game ideas in it. I made a gladiatorial fighting game, which I have a couple pictures of. It didn't work super well, but it was still super fun. I made a prototype of sort of like a horror adventure game called Athena, where you woke up and your arms had been taken from you and replaced with robot arms. And I had played around with a bunch of like on-hand VR interface stuff. So you had a couple buttons on your wrist that could interface with machines, and your health bar was actually these 4 different like health rods. And if you took damage, one of them would disable, and you could pick up other ones in the environment and slot them back in to your arm. It was actually for that project that I modeled the pistol that it would eventually go into the Escape game. And then after that, well, when my senior year came and we could pick our sort of senior thesis project, I threw every bit of my energy into making this. And for some more context, I can't express to you how much this system was not a system set up to make what you can see here, because this was a scripting language set up for like people doing like immersive improvisational theater. It didn't have any of the structures that you would build an action game out of. I remember being told by one of them that several students in the past had tried making an action game in the system and had failed because there was like no raycasts, there was no way to build something like a projectile. You couldn't like do method calls really unless you wanted to like edit the C code that sort of like made modules for it, which I didn't know how to do, and you had to make that work with the networking. It was all just pre-structured events, volumes, moving transforms. So like as an example, the gun that you see me firing there, for the projectile, there's like a volume for each of the enemies. That's like when a thing called this enters this volume. And I had a projectile object underneath the gun object, and it would just, every time you click the button, it would play the gun sound, trigger the particle effect, and then just move this object as a child object out and then reset its position. So there was only ever one bullet per gun, and it only moved at like 20 meters a second or something like that, because if it moved too fast, because the thing wasn't running at a very high frame rate, it would just move past the volume. So it barely worked. It was not a good game by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a way to try out a bunch of things that had, to my knowledge, never existed beforehand. And it's interesting too, looking back, because a bunch of the things that we talked about in my class and with other people who tried it out were some of the exact same sort of questions design questions you run into making a hand-tracked VR game right now. Like with a shotgun, if you are making a pump action shotgun in a VR game where you're going like this every time you fire and you're loading a shell in one at a time every time you fire, your arms are going to get real tired real fast. And that was actually one of the complaints. There was a number of like doubters in regards to like, I don't know if anyone's going to actually enjoy playing a shooter game where you have to perform these sort of like manual, gross motor actions to continue to operate things. But yeah, but in terms of, but the funny part about that really is that like this was my big VR project, of undergrad. I ended up teaching classes using this system for later years, but didn't end up building anything of this scale. Basically, at the same time, I had also really gotten into Second Life, and that was a platform where I could create things and actually share them with other people. And so almost all of my creative energies ended up going towards that. A topic maybe for another video at some time. Some of it is definitely cringe. But it meant that when hand-tracked VR started up again, after, the Rift got the Oculus Touch controllers and the Vive came out, I got early access to a Vive dev kit a couple months before it launched. And the first thing I built, which you can literally just on this channel, go look at the oldest video I have posted, showing VR stuff, the Virtual Object Experiments 1. That's just like me having access to an HTC Vive for a couple days. I had been a heavy Unity engine user, and the moment I had hand track controllers again, the first thing I went about building was, a pistol and a shotgun, because I wanted to understand what was possible with the medium, and essentially like create a delta from like, okay, I made a gun you could hold and operate it way back then, and now I'm going to do it again and just see how it feels and see what's possible now or not. And well, you all know the rest of the story. It's, people really thought that was sweet. I had a number of YouTube videos go way more viral than anything I had ever made online before. We decided as a group to be like, let's try to make an early access game in 7 weeks. And we've been here doing meaty nonsense for almost 9 years since. But it all starts with, with the janky cave, 5,000 triangles on screen, maybe, rail shooter that I made and my early obsession with VR. So I've been, it's weird looking back at something like this and realizing that, I don't know, the sequence of events of my life form a more cohesive narrative than I usually think of them. That I have been doing this for much longer than I typically think about. And it's, there's that I don't know the exact wording of the aphorism, but that an artist just keeps making the same work over and over again throughout their life. And I certainly feel that way sometimes, that I'm just continuing, that everything I've done is just whatever fascinated me that first day that I walked into that lab at the back of the DMS department. And that I'm still chasing that really what impacted me was but what was different from everything else was the like, wait a minute, you can, as a 3D artist, I can make a thing, and instead of just viewing it, down here on a screen, I can have a perceptual experience of being in it. And really the thing that's compelling at the very core of that has kept me doing this to this day. So anywho, for those of you who are still watching after that, thanks for going down this trip down memory lane with me, getting a piece of mine and H3's history that I finally have the visual documentation of the existence of, instead of like a single picture in my very foggy memory of. So I wish you all a wonderful weekend, and I will see you soon. Peace.